I was about to leave her party until she grabbed my wrist and whispered, "Stay." That one moment changed everything. I wasn't sure what I was expecting when I walked into her party, but I quickly realized it wasn't going to be ordinary. The sound of laughter and soft music filled the air, a mix of old jazz records and the subtle hum of conversations that threaded through the room. People milled about with glasses in hand, voices overlapping, but somehow she stood out amid the chaos. She moved through the crowd like she owned the space without needing to, graceful, confident, yet not intimidating. Her hair fell in gentle waves over her shoulders, catching the light every time she tilted her head while laughing. There was something about the way she smiled, warm, knowing, a hint of mischief, that made my chest tighten in a way I wasn't expecting. I felt slightly out of place. Most people here had known her for years, yet she welcomed each guest with effortless charm. I was just me, younger, unsure, trying to navigate the energy of a room where everyone seemed so polished. And yet, every time our eyes met across the room, there was this subtle recognition, like she had already seen me. Not the surface, not the awkwardness, but me. At one point, she passed by to hand me a drink. Our hands brushed, fleeting, but electric. My fingers lingered a moment longer than they should have, and I caught a faint whiff of her perfume, a mix of something floral and smoky, comforting and intoxicating. I tried to steady myself, to focus on small talk, but my eyes kept drifting to her, noticing the curve of her smile, the quiet confidence in the way she held herself. We ended up in the kitchen for a moment, where the noise of the main room softened into background hums. She leaned slightly against the counter, casually, but the angle made her seem effortlessly poised. I noticed how her eyes seemed to catch the light differently when she laughed, a sparkle that felt personal, like she was sharing a secret with me alone. Despite the crowd, despite the chatter, I found myself drawn to her, not just because of her beauty, which was undeniable, but because there was warmth beneath it, a depth in her eyes, a softness in the way she moved, gestures that felt unstudied yet intentional. She noticed me noticing her, I think. Every time our hands brushed, every time she smiled in my direction, my heart picked up slightly, like I was teetering on the edge of something I wasn't ready to define. By the time I considered moving toward the door, telling myself it was time to leave, to not overstep boundaries, there was a tension lingering in the air, something unspoken, hovering in those brief touches and glances. I didn't realize yet how much that small, seemingly ordinary party would pull me into her orbit. And just like that, my curiosity, my hesitation, my quiet admiration all collided in a single thought. I wasn't ready to leave. Not yet. Somewhere between the clinking of glasses and the laughter that bounced off the walls, we found a quieter corner of the room. It wasn't planned. I don't think either of us noticed moving toward it, but suddenly we were removed from the chaos, standing in a space that felt almost private. The music softened in the distance, the crowd blurred, and all that remained was her, a few steps away, radiant in a way that made the room feel smaller and warmer. I remember the first words I said, or maybe it was her, words about something trivial at first, a book, a song, something easy. But even in those casual exchanges, there was an undercurrent of something heavier, something real. She laughed at one of my comments, a sound that didn't just reach my ears but seemed to wrap around me, filling the spaces I didn't even know were empty. Her eyes caught mine for just a fraction of a second longer than casual politeness required, and I felt a strange gravity, a pull that made me lean just a little closer without thinking. There was something intimate about standing there, close enough that I could see the subtle curve of her smile lines, the small gestures she made with her hands when she spoke. She tucked a strand of hair behind her ear absent-mindedly, and I noticed the softness of her skin, the warm tone that seemed to glow in the muted light. The accidental brushing of our fingers as she reached for her drink wasn't just contact. It was a spark, a quiet acknowledgement that neither of us wanted to break the closeness. We began talking about things we normally don't share with casual acquaintances, the small regrets, the odd joys, the little observations about life that no one else seemed to notice. She listened in a way that made me feel seen, really seen, not judged, not patronized, but understood. And I found myself opening up, letting my voice slow, letting my thoughts linger in the space between us. There were pauses, comfortable silences where words weren't necessary. Her gaze followed mine when I spoke, soft and attentive, and I could feel her presence like a gentle weight next to me. Every so often, her hand would brush against mine, not forced, not deliberate, just a fleeting contact that made my chest tighten. The more we talked, the more I realized that age didn't matter here. Not in this corner of the party, not in the way our conversation seemed to flow effortlessly. But beneath the warmth and laughter, there was a subtle tension. I could sense her hesitation just as clearly as my own. A fleeting glance, a half-smile that didn't reach her eyes, tiny signals that told me she, too, was aware of the unspoken. We were testing boundaries, inching closer emotionally, but neither of us wanted to rush what was unfolding naturally. By the time we drifted back toward the crowd, the world outside that quiet corner felt distant, almost unreal. I left with my mind racing, my heart strangely light, but also with the weight of something unspoken between us, something I couldn't yet name, but knew I wanted to explore. And in that moment, I realized the party wasn't just about drinks or music. It was about her, and the undeniable pull that made me want to stay in her orbit, no matter what. As the evening stretched on, the party's energy seemed to grow louder, more chaotic. Conversations overlapped, laughter rose in waves, and the clinking of glasses echoed through the room like a constant reminder that I was still, somehow, an outsider in a world that felt effortlessly in sync. I felt it then, the familiar tug of self-doubt. Maybe it was time to leave, I told myself. Maybe I'd overstayed, or maybe I was reading too much into things that weren't meant to be. I glanced toward the door, letting my eyes skim across the crowd in a casual, almost rehearsed way. I thought about slipping out quietly, giving myself the comfort of an exit without confrontation. But then, every time my gaze returned, I saw her, moving gracefully among her guests, laughing with that effortless warmth, and something in me hesitated. There was a magnetic pull I couldn't rationalize, a tether that made the idea of leaving feel sudden and wrong. I tried to convince myself it was just admiration, fleeting, superficial. But every time our eyes met, even across the noise and the sea of people, the connection lingered. It wasn't just noticing her beauty or charm. It was the way she carried herself, confident yet approachable, and the subtle vulnerability that shimmered behind her composed exterior. She seemed to notice me noticing her, too. The slightest arch of her brow, the half-smile that tugged at the corners of her lips, suggesting she knew more than she let on. I edged toward the door, my hand brushing against my coat, as if the act of putting it on could somehow shield me from the emotions swirling inside. And that's when I felt it. An almost imperceptible nudge, a playful yet deliberate pause in her movement as she glanced in my direction. She didn't say anything at first, but there was a lightness in her stance, a subtle tease in her posture, that made me stop in my tracks. It was like she was daring me to act on impulse, to make a choice that defied caution. Every step toward the exit became heavier, weighed down by anticipation, uncertainty, and a growing awareness of what I didn't want to lose, the possibility of something real, even if undefined. My fingers brushed hers as she passed, a fleeting touch that sent a spark up my arm. My chest tightened, and suddenly, leaving felt impossible, even though every rational thought urged me forward. The tension between us was quiet but undeniable, an invisible current that neither of us had named yet. I could sense her curiosity, her subtle interest, and perhaps even a hint of longing mirrored in her eyes. And in that moment, I realized the hesitation wasn't just mine. It was ours, a shared, unspoken acknowledgement of something we were both trying to navigate without words. I stopped moving, unsure of whether to retreat or surrender to the pull. The party raged on behind us, but in that instant, all I could feel was the weight of her presence, the faint brush of her perfume, and the silent question hovering between us. Would I stay, or would I walk away and wonder what might have been? And just like that, the decision felt bigger than the party, bigger than the room. It was the first moment I truly recognized that this connection might be impossible to ignore. Just as I was about to step toward the door, telling myself it was time to leave, I felt it, her hand on my wrist. A simple touch, but heavy with intention. It wasn't forceful, not demanding, yet it held me in place in a way nothing else had that night. I froze, caught between politeness, surprise, and something deeper I couldn't quite name. Her eyes met mine, searching, questioning, and maybe even challenging me. There was a quiet intensity there, a subtle dare in the way she held my gaze. For a moment, the noise of the party faded into background static. The laughter, the chatter, the music, all irrelevant. There was only her, only the warmth of her touch, and the sudden realization that I didn't want to walk away. Her grip on my wrist was firm yet tender, a paradox that mirrored the tension between us. I could feel the pulse beneath her skin, the slight pressure that suggested closeness without overstepping. It was an invitation disguised as a small gesture, a single moment that spoke louder than words could. My own hand twitched, tempted to respond, to touch hers fully, but I held back, unsure if this was meant to be noticed or simply felt. For a second, I thought about all the reasons I should leave, the age difference, the social proprieties, the voice in my head warning me to be cautious. But the pull in her gaze, the warmth of her hand, the unspoken question lingering between us made all of that seem distant, irrelevant even. She wanted me to stay, and somewhere deep down, I wanted to. There was a heartbeat of silence between us, long enough that I noticed every detail. The faint scent of her perfume, the gentle rise and fall of her chest, the way her hair caught the light in soft waves. She didn't pull me closer, didn't force the moment. Instead, she let the contact speak for her. That pause, that hesitation, that shared awareness, it carried more meaning than anything either of us could have said. In that instant, I realized this was more than a flirtation, more than a fleeting attraction. This was the start of something tangible, something that demanded attention and acknowledgement. It was rare, a connection that didn't need immediate words but thrived in the silent understanding of proximity, of shared space, of the electricity of touch. She let go eventually, just slightly, enough that I could move, but not without leaving a lingering impression. The faint warmth of her hand remained on my wrist, a memory etched into my skin. And as I stepped back, my mind was racing, not with confusion, but with recognition. I didn't want to leave. I didn't want to step away from whatever this was, whatever she was offering me in that single, quiet moment. The turning point wasn't dramatic. There were no confessions, no grand gestures. It was just a touch, a look, a heartbeat of tension. But it was enough. Enough to make me realize that the night, and perhaps everything that followed, would never be the same. And as we stood there, the space between us charged with possibility, I knew I was no longer merely a guest at her party. I was a participant in something fragile, intimate, and utterly magnetic. After that brief but electric pause, we drifted away from the crowd, almost instinctively, toward a quieter part of the room. Somewhere near the balcony, where the warm hum of the party softened into distant laughter and clinking glasses, it felt as if the rest of the world no longer existed. The night air outside was cooler, carrying a faint scent of flowers from the garden, and for the first time all evening, it felt like we had found a private space just for us. We leaned against the railing, the city lights below casting a soft glow over her features. The way the light hit her face made everything about her seem more real, more human. The laugh lines around her eyes, the curve of her lips, the subtle tilt of her head when she listened. She didn't need to speak to hold my attention. Her presence alone was magnetic. Conversation came slowly, deliberately, about small things at first, work, favorite movies, and books, but it didn't stay small for long. Somehow, naturally, it evolved into more personal territory, the quiet regrets, the unexpected joys, the moments that shaped who we had become. She spoke with honesty, not trying to impress, just sharing. And I listened, compelled, careful not to rush, but also unable to stop myself from leaning in slightly, drawn to the way her words resonated. There were moments of laughter, soft and warm, and moments of silence that were somehow even more powerful. In those silences, I felt the weight of her gaze, the subtle electricity of proximity. Our hands brushed occasionally, not deliberately, but with a timing that made every touch feel significant. Once, she moved to tuck a loose strand of hair behind her ear, and I caught a fleeting glance of her wrist brushing my hand. It was nothing outwardly dramatic, but internally, it left a spark that lingered long after. The conversation was intimate, yet not overwhelming. She didn't demand anything from me, and I didn't feel pressured to say more than I could. The balance of vulnerability and restraint created a rhythm, a quiet dance of emotional closeness. I noticed the way she leaned slightly toward me when making a point, the subtle incline of her shoulder, and the way her eyes softened when she smiled. Small gestures that spoke volumes about comfort, trust, and curiosity. Time became slippery. Minutes stretched into an unspoken eternity. Every laugh, every pause, every accidental touch deepened the connection, weaving a fragile intimacy that neither of us had planned but both welcomed. The distant party noise became a muted background, emphasizing the cocoon we had created together, a space where age, expectations, and social norms didn't matter, where only the quiet pull between us existed. By the time we returned to the room, there was an unspoken understanding in the space between us, a recognition that this night, this encounter, was shifting something fundamental. We didn't need to name it yet. It was enough that the moment existed, that the touch lingered, and that the tension, sweet and subtle, had transformed into something heavier, more profound. And as we stepped back into the party's hum, I realized with clarity, whatever this connection was, it wasn't fleeting. It had settled into me like a soft, insistent echo that I wouldn't forget, and I knew the night wasn't over. Not for me, not for her, and certainly not for what was beginning to grow between us. By the time the party was winding down, there was a quiet intimacy between us that had grown from the small touches, lingering glances, and shared silences of the night. The music had softened, conversations had thinned, and the golden light of the room gave everything a warmer, more intimate glow. Somehow, we had found ourselves again near the balcony, the city lights casting long, soft shadows around her. She leaned against the railing, her posture relaxed but deliberate, as if she were choosing to remain close, and not merely out of politeness. Her eyes met mine with a depth I hadn't seen before, an openness that felt like an invitation. For a moment, I couldn't speak, caught in the gravity of her presence, in the subtle pull that had been building since the moment we first met that evening. Finally, she spoke, softly, almost hesitantly. "I didn't expect to enjoy your company so much tonight," she said, and there was a vulnerability in her tone that made my chest tighten. It wasn't just a compliment, it was a confession of sorts. She was revealing a piece of herself, something she rarely shared, and the honesty in her words resonated in me more deeply than I anticipated. I took a small step closer, the cool night air brushing past us, carrying the faint scent of her perfume, now familiar, now comforting. "I feel the same," I admitted, my voice low, careful, yet sincere. "I wasn't expecting this. You. Everything." The words felt clumsy, inadequate even, but they were honest, and I saw the understanding flicker in her eyes. There was a pause, long enough that the silence itself became significant. Her gaze softened, her hand brushing briefly against mine, lingering just long enough to send a shiver through me. It wasn't a grand gesture, nothing dramatic or rushed, but in that small touch, I felt everything. The acknowledgement of the tension that had been simmering, the mutual desire, and the unspoken question of what came next. We laughed softly at the awkwardness of admitting feelings that had been obvious in every accidental brush, in every lingering look. The age difference, the social expectations, the what-ifs, all of it seemed secondary now, trivial compared to the connection we had built in these few hours. She didn't reach for me to pull me closer, and I didn't rush forward. Instead, we stood there, letting the weight of honesty settle between us, delicate yet undeniable. Her eyes glimmered with something tender, something that suggested both excitement and caution. "I'm not sure what this means yet," she admitted quietly, and it was the truth we both felt. But there was no fear, no doubt in the desire to simply be near each other, to linger in the intimacy we had created. In that moment, the unspoken became spoken. We had acknowledged the pull, the attraction, the warmth of our connection. And though the future remained uncertain, that confession, soft, real, and deliberate, had changed everything. Whatever came next, we knew we had found something rare, a quiet intensity that could not be ignored. As we lingered, the night wrapping around us like a gentle embrace, I realized that the confession wasn't the end of the story. It was the beginning of understanding, of mutual curiosity, and of the slow-burning promise that something extraordinary was unfolding between us. The party had nearly dissolved by the time we stepped back into the room. The music was softer, the remaining guests scattered, lingering in small clusters or quietly saying goodbyes. The once buzzing space now felt almost empty, echoing slightly with the remnants of laughter and conversation. It gave the evening a quiet, reflective quality, as if the night itself wanted us to savor what had unfolded. I walked beside her, a careful distance apart, not because I needed space, but because the proximity already felt charged enough to be overwhelming. Her presence beside me was both comforting and intoxicating. Every step we took, every subtle movement she made, seemed to radiate warmth and unspoken meaning. I caught glimpses of her glance directed at me, and in those fleeting moments, the world felt suspended, tiny pauses of connection that carried far more weight than any words could. We paused near the doorway as she prepared to leave. For a moment, the air hung heavy with the things we hadn't said yet. The questions, the uncertainties, the promises we weren't ready to name. I reached out, hesitating, and brushed a hand against hers. Not a grab, not a demand, just a soft, deliberate touch. Her fingers lingered in response, the contact enough to make the heart race, the warmth linger. "I'm glad you stayed," she said, voice low, sincere. Her eyes held mine, unflinching, full of something both tender and knowing. There was no need for further explanation. That one sentence carried the weight of all the glances, the silences, the touches that had stretched through the evening. I smiled, a slow, honest smile, and realized I didn't need to overthink it. "Me too," I said. The simplicity of the words belied the depth behind them. The relief, the acknowledgement, the growing realization that this connection, fragile and new, was worth embracing, even without knowing what the future held. We lingered, hand near hand, neither of us moving to part immediately. The city lights outside painted her profile in a soft glow, highlighting the contours of her face, the subtle warmth in her eyes. There was a quiet intimacy in just standing there together, in the ease of our proximity and the knowledge that we had shared something rare. Eventually, we stepped out together, walking slowly toward the quiet streets, the cool night air wrapping around us like a gentle embrace. The tension that had been building all evening had transformed into a comfortable, tangible bond, something that didn't need to be rushed, named, or forced. The age difference, the social expectations, the uncertainties, they mattered far less than the undeniable pull between us, the connection that had grown from curiosity into mutual understanding. We didn't need a grand declaration or a final kiss. Sometimes, the most powerful moments are in what isn't said. Just the shared glance, the soft brush of hands, the lingering presence. These were enough. And in that quiet, deliberate pause, I knew that this night, this connection, had changed me, and likely her, in ways neither of us could fully articulate yet. As we finally parted ways, there was no sense of ending, only a beginning. A slow-burning promise that whatever came next would be guided by honesty, curiosity, and the magnetic pull that had drawn us together in the first place. For now, the night held us in its memory, and we walked away knowing that this connection, fragile and beautiful, was ours to explore. Sparkles, if you felt the tension, the sparks, and the quiet pull between them tonight. Make sure to like and subscribe for more slow-burn romances that linger long after the story ends. Share your favorite moment in the comments. I'd love to hear which part made your heart skip a beat.